Ladies and gentlemen, would you please welcome the next President of the United States, Senator Dr. Randy Paul.
See my wife today, but I got to see her on television. When I first thought about running for office, people said, why in the world would you want to do this? Why in the world would you want to subject yourself to the nature of this, of traveling across the country and being away from your family? And I tell people, sort of tongue in cheek, that I got tired of throwing stuff at my TV and yelling at my TV, and decided I would get into the arena and try to do something to change it. And I started about the time that some of this Tea Party uprising was, around 2009, getting interested. I was interested in some of the same things that other people were. I was interested and, I guess, upset in a way with my own party. I was upset that when Republicans got elected, we doubled the size of the debt. Republicans got elected and we bailed out the big banks in New York. Republicans got elected and we doubled the size of the Department of Education. I said, who are these people? We need new Republicans to be involved. I was upset that Republicans said, oh, we're for Common Core. We're for more centralization of education. I was like, we need something different. And my wife said, well, you just started a new medical practice. I had just bought my own building. I'd gone out on my own. And she said, you're crazy. You're going to give up all of this. And I said, well, nobody will listen to me. There won't be much chance I can get elected. But sure enough, I did get elected, and I got to Washington, and one of the things I discovered when I got there was, you know what, there is no monopoly of knowledge there. One of the senators said to me, he said, over the first 6 months you're here, you'll pinch yourself and you'll say, how did I get here amongst all these famous people? Some of them have been there since I was a kid. And then they said, the next 6 months you'll pinch yourself and say, how the hell did the rest of these people? So I'm in the second 6 months, and I'm just like David. I cannot imagine why we limit the terms of the president. The only way we're ever going to change it is we need term limits for everybody in Washington. I also don't think they're ever going to balance the budget unless we force them to. We absolutely have to have a constitutional amendment that says what comes in is what goes out. We need a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. Some on the other side, the liberal pundits, will say, well, you don't believe in any government. And I'm like, I believe in $3.3 trillion worth. What comes in? I'll spend what comes in. I just won't spend what's not coming in. I don't think we get stronger as a country to borrow money from China to then send it to Pakistan. It makes absolutely no sense. We've got people in our party, in fact, almost everyone else running for president on our side loves foreign aid. They just love passing it out. They think that's how we project our strength. And it's like, really? I don't think you project strength from bankruptcy court. If you're borrowing money from China to build roads and bridges in Pakistan, we got some roads and bridges at home that need to be repaired. It's even worse than that. They send your money to countries that actually hate us. When you see people burning our flag on TV, those people are getting your money and squandering it. And what I say is not one penny more to countries that are burning our flag and chanting death to America. Not one penny more. So I'm on the Foreign Relations Committee, and I brought this up. I said to my staff, how many countries that receive our money actually are persecuting Christians? How many countries that receive our money put Christians in jail if they marry someone outside their faith? Or put people in jail who convert? In about 25 different countries, if you go from being a Muslim to being a Christian, it's the death penalty. I can't imagine that we would want to give any country money that would send it to death for a religious conversion. So I introduced an amendment thinking, certainly everybody would agree with me. It sounds so common sense. So I introduced my amendment in the Foreign Relations Committee. Every Democrat voted against me, and nearly every Republican. vote was 18-2 to continue sending money to about 25 countries that persecute Christians. Aisha Bibi lives in Pakistan. One day she decided to go draw water from the well in a predominantly Muslim village, which most of the villages are predominantly Muslim. As she's drawing water, they begin stoning her. They begin beating her with sticks. And she's crying out for help. And as she's crying out for help, finally the police come and they arrest her. And the other women in the village say, oh, she was blaspheming us while we were stoning her. In our country, we'd call that gossip. And the people doing the stoning and the beating would have been in jail. But over there, she was put in jail. She's been in jail for 5 years in Pakistan on death row. Zarkis El-Zakhem was a young man in a city called Malula in Syria. He's a Christian. There are Christians that have been in Syria since the time of Christ. In fact, I have a friend who was in medical school with me, and his family was from Syria originally, and I said, well, are you Christian or Muslim? He says, well, Christian. I said, oh, well, how long have your family been Christian? He said, a lot longer than your family. And it's true, we don't think about it. A lot of us, if your family came from Germany or England, it was hundreds of years before Christianity made its way into Northern Europe. But there are Christians that have been Christians since the beginning of time, or since Jesus' time. There have been Christians in Syria, and they're under attack. So Zarkis El-Zakhem, the Islamic rebels, come into town. Just incidentally, the Islamic rebels that we're supporting, on the same side of the battle, fighting against Assad. We've been pouring tons of weapons into the Syrian civil war for the last several years. So is Saudi Arabia, so is Qatar. All of these weapons go to the Islamic rebels. Which one are good and bad? I've got no idea. There's 1,500 different groups. But even our ambassador said that these Islamic rebels, it's inevitable that the ones we give weapons to are fighting alongside Al-Qaeda and ISIS. And it's like, really? So we're giving weapons, we're not sure who these people are. Some of them have said when they're done with Assad, they will use our weapons to attack Israel. It's a mess. They have all hated each other for 1,000 years over there. We need to protect American interests, but not be in the middle of all their stuff that makes no sense and gets us deeper and deeper and deeper into a quagmire. So Zarkis El-Zakhem is in the city of Malula. They speak Aramaic there, the same language that Jesus spoke. It's a city of Christians. It's been Christian since the very beginning, since the beginning when Jesus was around. They come into his village, these Islamic rebels, who are allied with the people we are supporting in that civil war. They come into the village and they stand up and he says, I am a Christian, and if you must kill me, do it. And these were his last words. It's a terrible situation over there, but I don't want our arms and our money going to the people who are killing Christians. There's 2 million Christians in Syria. Who protects them? An awful guy named Assad. I'm not a big fan of Assad, but Bashar al-Assad protects the Christians and has for decade after decade. So if you ask any Christian in Syria, who would you rather have, Assad or ISIS? They'll tell you the devil we know is better than the devil that's chopping our heads off. And so the thing is we need to think before we act. As a physician, we're taught to first do no harm. So let's think about it. So about 2 years ago, we had a vote. We had a vote on whether or not we should send arms into the moderate Syrian rebels. And I was like, how do you tell the difference? One of our CIA analysts said about the Middle East, this is a guy who spent time over there, he said, well, the only thing modern about the Syrian rebels is their ability to fight. So what happened is we ostensibly gave them arms, and ISIS took the arms from them. Saudi Arabia didn't care who they gave the arms to. They just flooded in arms. Qatar did the same thing. And so al-Nusra, which is an offshoot of Al-Qaeda, got arms. ISIS probably got arms. But in the end, the only people left standing are ISIS, and they have our weapons. And so 2 years ago, I said that the great irony of arming these people is we will have to go back one day to fight against our own arms. And now I think we do have to do something. I don't want to send American troops back over there, but we got to do something to stop them. Otherwise, we'd be as guilty as Hillary Clinton of not defending our people. In Benghazi, her inability to provide defense, her 9-month-long history of pulling the security out of there and allowing the Benghazi diplomatic mission to be exposed is inexcusable, and it should forever preclude her from holding higher office. To do something about ISIS. We have to do something to protect our embassy in Baghdad, to protect our consulate in Erbil. But it doesn't always have to be American troops. We can have American firepower, air power that can support what's going on over there without putting troops back in there. And people say, well, it only will happen if America puts troops in. Here's the thing, yes, we can take back Mosul. Our guys are the best in the world, the best equipped, the fiercest fighters. We have the best fighters in the world. We can take Mosul back in a week. And then what? Mosul's a city of 1.5 million Sunnis. The whole problem is the soldiers that were garrisoned there to sort of be in charge of Mosul's defense were Shiite. It's a political problem. The government in Iraq became completely Shiite, and they boxed out all the Sunnis. So a city like Mosul, what did the Shiites do when the ISIS came? The Shiites ran. I tell people if we want to buy something for the Shiite Iraqi army, we should buy them tear-away uniforms. So when they run, they can tear their uniforms off. But there are fighters over there. The Kurds will fight. In fact, I've said give the Kurds a homeland. They live there. They'll fight for it. If they're going to fight to the death to protect their homeland and to push out ISIS, give them a homeland. I see no reason not. But ultimately, civilized Islam is going to have to step up and help with this. They're never going to accept us as overlords. They're never going to accept us as policemen. They're never going to accept us as their government. And they're also not going to accept the Shiites as their government. It has to be people of their religion. It has to be people of their faith. And it doesn't mean we have no involvement, but it does mean we need to rethink before we put another 500,000, million troops back in the Middle East. And I'm of the opinion, first, do no harm. We haven't won in Iowa the last couple times around. I don't know if you remember that. President Obama, I think, won Iowa the last 2 times. There's 18 states Republicans haven't won in 31 years. So there's 2 possibilities. People say, well, how will Republicans ever win again? One, we can dilute what we stand for, we can give up on principle, and we can become just like the Democrats. That's one way. I think it's a bad plan, that's not what I'm for. But I also don't think it'll work. We've tried it many times. But there's another way. I think we can be for what we're for. In fact, I think part of our problem is we need to be more boldly for what we are for. There was a time when we believed in tax cuts. We believed in making Washington smaller and the economy bigger in Iowa by leaving more money in Iowa. The people in Washington now, on our side, the Republicans, you know what their big deal is? They're for revenue-neutral tax reform. You know what that means? Half of you will pay more, half of you will pay less, and the net result of the economy is neutral or zero. When Reagan ran for office, he said, Washington's gobbling up too much of our money. I'm going to cut the tax rates, and I'm going to leave the money with the productive sector, and we'll have more jobs. And we had tens of millions of jobs created. This is the answer, to be boldly for what we are for, the private marketplace, the productive marketplace, and for not wasting and squandering and sending it to Washington. But we need to be boldly for what we are for. On other fronts, if we want our jobs not to go overseas, if we want our jobs to remain here, we need to have competitive government policy. The corporate tax rate, the business tax rate is 35%. In Ireland, it's 12%. In France, it's 20%. In Canada, it's 15%. We are more than twice the business tax rate of anybody in the world. And do you wonder why businesses are going overseas? I have a bill right now to reduce the tax rate to 6.5% to bring your money home, and then I take the tax revenue from that and put it in the road fund. I'll said I'm a Democrat on the other side, so I've got a Democrat co-sponsor. It's a bipartisan bill. It could pass this year if we can wake up and do the right thing. The other thing we need to do is, in being boldly for what we are for, we need to be once again the party of the Bill of Rights, the entire Bill of Rights. We're good with the Second Amendment. In fact, the next 15 Republicans or 20 or 30 that are running for president that come to your town, they'll all say they're good for the Second Amendment. They probably are, most of them, decent with the Second Amendment. But what I say is we need to be for the rest of the Bill of Rights as well. You can't really protect the Second Amendment unless you're for the First Amendment or unless you're for the Fourth Amendment. The Fourth Amendment says that the government can't come in your house. This was a big deal. James Otis fought against the British government for 15 years before the Revolution. John Adams said that his fight was the spark of the American Revolution that got us going. What was he fighting against? He was fighting against generalized warrants, writs of assistance. These were where the government would have a soldier write a warrant with no one's name on it and just said American on it, and you could go in anybody's house to see if they were paying the stamp tax. Well, guess what? Your government now is allowing a warrant that has somebody's name on it by the name of Verizon. I don't know anybody named Mr. Verizon. Why is this a big deal? Because the Fourth Amendment said the government can only look at your stuff if they put your name on the warrant, if they specify what they want, and then they give some kind of reasoning, probable cause, suspicion as to why you committed a crime. They don't have to prove it. They have to at least submit it to an independent person. Now, why is that important? Why don't you want the police to have that power? Many policemen are my friends, they're my neighbors, people I've known for 30 years, and they're like, well, you don't trust me. No, it's not you. It's about the general division of power so we don't get someone bad who makes decisions based on bias. It happened in the South, where if you were black, it's still happening in part of our countries, where if you're black riding around, you may be at a higher incidence of being picked up than if you're white. So what do we want to do? We have to divide the power so we don't get too much power in one hand to make sure we don't have bias enter into things. The Fourth Amendment protects you against the government coming into your house without a valid constitutional warrant. The Fifth and Sixth Amendment, I call them the amendments of justice. This says that if you are accused of a crime, you get your day in court. We have something in our country called civil asset forfeiture. What does that mean? If you're riding down the road and you make a lane change without putting your blinker on, and they pull you over and you're headed to the dentist and you've got $2,000 in cash, the government can take your money. They don't even have to charge you with anything. In fact, it's sort of an extortion racket. They say, well, if you sign this piece of paper, we'll give you half of it back. They negotiate on the side of the road with you on letting you keep your money, but you have to promise not to sue them for the other half. If they take all $2,000 you have to then go to court and prove where you got the money. This is disproportionately being used against poor people, African Americans and Hispanics. There is bias that's entered into this, not so much because of an overt racism, but because criminality happens in places where more people live, in bigger cities where people are closer together, and so the police over and over go to the same communities, but what happens is the people being affected by this injustice tend to be the poor among us. We need to say that the government should never take your stuff unless you're convicted. You are innocent until proven guilty, not the opposite. The Sixth Amendment says you have a right to a trial, to a speedy trial. And you think, well, gosh, who's against that? Certainly no one's going around the country campaigning about it. There are people. We had this debate in the Senate. In 2011, we had a debate over whether an American citizen can be indefinitely detained without a trial. And I was in the middle of this debate. And I'm debating with this other senator. We won't mention any names, but he's from Arizona. So we're having this debate, and it's pretty lively. And I said, for goodness sakes, you would send an American citizen to Guantanamo Bay without a lawyer, without a trial? And he said, yeah, if they're dangerous. It's like, kind of begs the question, doesn't it? Who gets to decide who's dangerous and who's not? Anybody remember Richard Jewell? Everybody said Richard Jewell was the Olympic bomber. This is probably 10 years ago or now. TV convicted him. Everybody said it was him. He fit the profile. He had glasses. He had a backpack. He was a nerd. That's half the crowd. That's half of us. If that's what if that's the criteria for who's a terrorist or not, we've got to be kind of alarmed. If you're accused of a crime, you have to get your day in court. You have to get a lawyer. What I think about is if Richard Jewell had been a black man in 1920 in the South, he wouldn't have lived the rest of the day. This is why we have these protections, because there have been times in our history when we didn't do the right thing. Does anybody remember when we locked up tens of thousands of Japanese Americans without a trial, without a lawyer, because we were afraid? We were under attack. We were right to be mad at the Japanese, the country. But the thing is, we can't let bias enter into it, so we're just going to indiscriminately round people up. We have to protect our rights. When I know a young man who lost both legs and an arm fighting in the war, and I asked him what he fought for. He said the Bill of Rights. So while he's over there risking his life and limb, we're giving up, our politicians are giving up on the Bill of Rights. I think that's an insult to this young man. The Sixth Amendment says you get a trial, a speedy trial. A couple of months ago, there was an article in the New Yorker about Khalif Browder, 16-year-old black kid in the Bronx. Poor family, they've got no money. He's been in and out of trouble. He's not a perfect kid, but I defy you to find me the perfect kid. But anyway, he's accused of a crime. They put him in Rikers Island for 3 years without a trial. They keep him in solitary confinement. He tries to commit suicide. And it's like, you see some of this anger in our country, you see people angry, and they're angry for, it seems irrational. Think if you were his parents. Think if you were his friend, and your friend was locked up for 3 years without a trial. We have to understand that justice means everybody gets treated with the Bill of Rights equally, that there's equal protection under the law, that there's due process, and realize that there are people in our country that don't feel like they're getting it. And finally, we have to remember the 9th and 10th Amendment. The 9th Amendment says that your rights are yours. They came from your Creator. No one is to disparage them. They're not all listed. They were afraid when they wrote the Bill of Rights that people would say, well, this is all you get. So the founders put the 9th and 10th Amendment in to say that if your right wasn't listed in the previous 8, that your right is not to be disparaged. It's still your rights. And the 10th Amendment says the powers not given to the federal government are to remain with the states and the people. We've forgotten that. But when we start to enforce that again, you'll have small government again, you'll have balanced budgets, and we'll have freedom of As we take this message forward across Iowa and across the country, what we're finding is that we're the only Republican that is beating Hillary Clinton in the purple states. Iowa's a purple state. Colorado's a purple state. Pennsylvania's a purple state. We're beating her because we're trying to expand the party. We got everybody that believes in the Second Amendment. That's good, and let's keep them. But we need the people who think that there needs to be more justice, the Fifth and Sixth Amendment. We need the people who believe in being left alone, the kids who say that their cell phone and their cell phone records is none of the government's business. This is an enormous crowd of people that were for the entire Bill of Rights. We are going to win in a landslide when we have a reasonable foreign policy that says that we go to war as a last resort, that Congress votes on going to war, the president doesn't decide it unilaterally. We're going to have a crowd so big and a movement so big that we're going to win in a landslide when we become the party of the entire Bill of Rights. I want to be part of it, and I hope you do too. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.